At 68, they thought I was just another lonely widower with deep pockets and shallow judgment. They had no idea they were targeting a man who'd spent 30 years investigating marriage fraud for Chase Manhattan Bank. I was sitting on my lanai in Naples, watching the Florida sunset paint the Gulf of Mexico gold, when Sophia Martinez walked into my life like something out of a romance novel. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and 36 years younger than me, which should have been my first red flag. "Excuse me," she said, approaching my table at the country club of Naples. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but aren't you Harold Mitchell? I think we have mutual friends, the Andersons from Bonita Springs." I looked up from my evening cocktail to see a stunning woman with dark hair, warm brown eyes, and the kind of smile that made men half my age forget their own names. She was wearing an elegant sundress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I'm Harold, yes, but I'm afraid I don't know any Andersons in Bonita Springs." Her laugh was musical, slightly embarrassed. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. You look exactly like Robert Anderson's brother-in-law. I'm Sophia Martinez." She extended a manicured hand. "Please let me buy you a drink to apologize for the confusion." That was how it started. A case of mistaken identity that was anything but accidental. For the next 2 hours, Sophia Martinez charmed me like a woman half her age shouldn't have been able to charm a man twice hers. She was an art dealer, she told me, recently relocated from Miami to Naples to open a gallery. She'd grown up in Argentina, studied in Paris, and spoke 4 languages fluently. More importantly, she seemed genuinely interested in me. My career at Chase Manhattan, my late wife Eleanor, my 2 grown children, my passion for sailing. When was the last time a beautiful woman had hung on my every word? "Harold, you have such an interesting life," she said as the evening wound down. "I hope this isn't too forward, but would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? I know a wonderful little restaurant in Old Naples." I should have said no. I should have remembered the 30 years I'd spent investigating financial crimes at one of America's largest banks. I should have recognized the classic patterns of a romance scam. Instead, I said yes. The next evening, Sophia arrived at my house in a red BMW convertible, looking like something from a magazine. She wore a black cocktail dress that showed just enough to be intriguing without being inappropriate, and she smelled like expensive perfume and promises. Dinner at Campiello was everything she'd promised. Excellent food, great wine, and conversation that flowed like we'd known each other for years instead of 24 hours. "Harold, can I ask you something personal?" she said over dessert. "Of course. What was your wife like?" "Eleanor." I felt the familiar pang I always experienced when discussing Eleanor. We'd been married 38 years before cancer took her 18 months ago. She was everything. Smart, funny, beautiful. She made me a better man just by being in the same room. Sophia reached across the table and touched my hand. "She sounds wonderful. You must miss her terribly." "Every day. I can see why she fell in love with you," Sophia said softly. "You have such kind eyes, such a generous heart." That should have been my second red flag. Professional romance scammers always compliment their target's generosity early in the relationship. It plants the seed for future financial requests. But I wasn't thinking like a fraud investigator that night. I was thinking like a lonely widower who hadn't felt desired by a woman in almost 2 years. Over the following weeks, Sophia became a regular part of my life. We had dinner 3 times a week, attended gallery openings and charity events, spent lazy afternoons on my boat. She fit seamlessly into my social circle at the country club, charming my friends with her intelligence and wit. Harold's found himself a keeper, my friend Tom Bradley told me after a particularly successful dinner party. "Sophia's got class brains and she obviously adores you." She did seem to adore me. Sophia listened to my stories about banking and sailing with genuine interest. She laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones. She seemed to care about my health, my happiness, my daily routine. When I mentioned that my son David was coming to visit from Miami, she didn't try to avoid meeting him. Another good sign, I thought. Scammers usually tried to isolate their targets from family members who might ask uncomfortable questions. "I'm nervous about meeting your son," she admitted the night before David's arrival. "What if he doesn't like me?" "David will love you," I assured her. "You're beautiful, intelligent, successful. What's not to like?" What I didn't know was that David Mitchell, Escacher, had already begun investigating Sophia Martinez. My son was a partner at a prestigious Miami law firm that specialized in white-collar crime. He'd inherited his suspicious nature from me. Along with my analytical mind and attention to detail, David arrived on a Friday evening, impeccably dressed as always, carrying his lawyer's briefcase and wearing the expression he usually reserved for hostile witnesses. "Dad, you look good," he said, embracing me at the door. "Retirement agrees with you. Wait until you meet Sophia. She's wonderful." David's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure she is." Sophia arrived an hour later, looking radiant in a white silk blouse and navy slacks. She'd brought flowers for the house and a bottle of expensive wine. "David, I've heard so much about you," she said, offering her hand with a warm smile. "Your father is so proud of you." "Miss Martinez," David replied formally, shaking her hand briefly. "Dad tells me you're an art dealer." "Yes, I specialize in Latin American contemporary artists. I'm opening a gallery here in Naples next month." "How interesting. Which artists do you represent?" For the next hour, David grilled Sophia with the skill of a prosecutor cross-examining a witness. Questions about her background, her education, her business, her family. Sophia handled every question smoothly, providing detailed answers that sounded completely authentic. But I could see David wasn't convinced. After dinner, while Sophia was freshening up, David pulled me aside. "Dad, we need to talk. What's wrong?" "I thought dinner went well." "Dad, how much do you know about this woman?" I felt defensive, protective of the relationship that had brought me more happiness than I'd experienced since Eleanor's death. "I know enough. She's kind, intelligent, successful. Dad, I ran a background check." My blood ran cold. "You did what?" "I'm sorry, but I had to. Dad, there's no record of Sophia Martinez owning or operating any art gallery in Miami. There's no record of her attending the universities she mentioned. Her business license was issued 3 months ago, right around the time she moved to Naples. David, that doesn't mean—" "Dad, I've seen this before. Beautiful younger woman targets wealthy older man, builds trust and emotional connection. Eventually there's a crisis that requires financial assistance. I wanted to be angry with my son for investigating the woman who'd brought joy back into my life. But 30 years of fraud investigation had taught me to recognize the warning signs he was describing. What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you be careful. Very careful." That night, after Sophia had gone home, I lay awake thinking about David's warnings. The rational part of my mind, the part that had spent 3 decades catching financial predators, knew my son was right to be suspicious. The timeline was convenient, the background was thin, and the age gap was significant, but the emotional part of my mind, the part that had been lonely and isolated since Eleanor's death, wanted to believe that sometimes older men do meet younger women who see past their age to their character and accomplishments. The next morning, Sophia called with news that would force me to choose between my head and my heart. "Harold, I have wonderful news," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "The gallery space I've been negotiating for just became available. The owner wants to close the deal immediately." "That's fantastic, sweetheart. There's just one small complication. The owner wants the first year's rent in advance, $50,000. My business loan won't be approved for another 2 weeks." And there it was. The request David had predicted. "Sophia, that's a substantial amount of money." "I know it's a lot to ask, Harold, but this is the opportunity I've been waiting for. The location is perfect, right on 5th Avenue South. I'll pay you back with interest as soon as my loan comes through." I found myself at a crossroads that thousands of older men face every year. Trust the woman who'd brought happiness back into my life, or trust the instincts that had made me successful at catching people exactly like her. "Let me think about it," I said. "Of course, I understand completely. There's just that the owner needs an answer by Monday." After she hung up, I sat in my study surrounded by 30 years of case files from my banking career. Files documenting romance scams, marriage fraud, and elder financial abuse. Cases where charming younger women had convinced lonely older men to part with their life savings. Cases that looked exactly like what was happening to me. I pulled out my laptop and began doing what I should have done weeks ago. Investigating Sophia Martinez with the same thoroughness I'd once applied to suspected criminals. What I found over the next 3 hours would change everything. The Sophia Martinez, who claimed to be 32 years old, was actually 28. The art gallery she'd mentioned in Miami had never existed. The universities she'd attended had no record of her enrollment. More disturbing, I found traces of at least 3 other identities: Sophia Morales in Tampa, Sophie Martin in Fort Lauderdale, and Sarah Martinez in West Palm Beach. Each identity had been used to target wealthy older men in Florida's retirement communities. Each relationship had followed the same pattern: chance meeting, rapid courtship, integration into the target's social circle, and eventually, a financial crisis that required immediate assistance. I found court records showing that Sophia Morales had been married to Charles Watson, 72, of Tampa, for 6 months before disappearing with $180,000 from their joint account. Sophie Martin had convinced Robert Green, 75, of Fort Lauderdale, to invest $220,000 in a fake art import business before vanishing without a trace. Sarah Martinez had married William Foster, 69, of West Palm Beach, and had been in the process of transferring his assets when Foster's daughter hired a private investigator. I was looking at the work of a professional marriage scammer, someone who specialized in targeting wealthy widowers, building emotional connections, and extracting maximum financial benefit before disappearing, someone who had chosen Harold Mitchell as her next victim. But Sophia Martinez, or whatever her real name was, had made one critical error in her target selection. She'd chosen to scam a man who'd spent 30 years learning exactly how people like her operated, and Harold Mitchell was about to teach her why that was the biggest mistake of her criminal career. I closed the laptop and walked to my safe, where I kept the .38 Smith & Wesson I'd carried during my years investigating threats against bank executives. Not because I planned to use it, but because the weight of it in my hand reminded me of who I used to be before grief and loneliness had made me vulnerable. I was Harold Mitchell, Senior Vice President of Fraud Investigation, Chase Manhattan Bank, the man who'd caught embezzlers, money launderers, and romance scammers for 3 decades, and I was about to remind Sophia Martinez that choosing the wrong target can be a career-ending mistake. The hunter had just realized he was supposed to be the prey, but the prey had claws and fangs, and 30 years of experience destroying people who thought they could steal from him. Game on. Monday morning, I called Sophia with the answer she'd been waiting for. But instead of giving her my money, I was about to give her the performance of a lifetime. "Harold!" Her voice was bright with anticipation when she answered, "Have you thought about the gallery opportunity?" "I have, sweetheart. And I want to help you." The relief in her voice was audible. "Oh, Harold, you don't know how much this means to me. There's just one thing. $50,000 is a significant investment. I'd like to meet with your business partners and review the lease agreement before I write the check." The pause lasted exactly 4 seconds, long enough for panic to set in, short enough to maintain the facade. "Of course," she said carefully, "although the owner is quite private. He prefers to work through intermediaries. I'm sure he'll make an exception for a potential investor." Sophia, in my banking career, I learned never to invest in anything I couldn't examine thoroughly. "Harold, the deadline is today. If we don't move quickly, then we'll find another opportunity. Sweetheart, good business deals don't disappear because someone wants to examine the paperwork." After I hung up, I called my son in Miami. "David, I need your help." "You were right about Sophia. Dad, what did you find?" "She's not who she claims to be." I found evidence of at least 3 other identities, all used to scam elderly men in Florida. Marriage fraud, financial theft, the whole playbook. "Jesus, Dad, are you okay?" "I'm angry. But more than that, I want to stop her before she moves on to the next victim." "What do you need from me?" "I need you to contact the victims I've identified. Charles Watson in Tampa, Robert Green in Fort Lauderdale, William Foster in West Palm Beach. If they're willing to cooperate, we might be able to build a federal case. Dad, you should contact the FBI directly." "I will. But first I want to gather enough evidence to make sure she can't slip away again." That afternoon, I hired Janet Martinez, the best private investigator in Naples. Janet was a former FBI agent who'd retired to Florida and started her own practice specializing in financial crimes. At 55, she was sharp, experienced, and had zero tolerance for people who preyed on vulnerable seniors. "Mr. Mitchell, what you're describing is a sophisticated operation," she said after reviewing my preliminary research. "This woman has been perfecting her technique for years. Can you help me stop her? I can help you destroy her, but I need to warn you, this could get dangerous. Professional marriage scammers don't usually work alone, and they can turn violent when cornered. Janet, I spent 30 years investigating people who thought they were smarter than me. I'm not afraid of Sophia Martinez." "Good, because we're going to need to get inside her operation to gather actionable evidence." Over the next week, Janet's investigation revealed the scope of Sophia's criminal enterprise. Her real name was Eleanor Vasquez, and she was part of an organized marriage fraud ring based in Miami. The operation targeted wealthy widowers throughout Florida, using a rotation of attractive women who specialized in different demographics. Eleanor Sophia specialized in older men with banking or financial backgrounds, because they typically had larger asset bases and more sophisticated investment portfolios. "Mr. Mitchell, she's stolen over $1.2 million from 7 victims in the past 3 years, Janet reported. "And those are just the ones I can document. Most victims are too embarrassed to report marriage fraud. What's her endgame with me? Based on the pattern, she'll propose marriage within the next few weeks. Once you're married, she'll start transferring assets incrementally. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate. She's patient. She'll bleed you slowly over months or years rather than grabbing everything at once." "How do we stop her?" "We give her exactly what she wants. And when she reaches for it, we snap the trap shut." Wednesday evening, Sophia arrived at my house for dinner looking more beautiful than ever. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, and she'd done something different with her hair that made her look even younger. "Harold, I'm so sorry about the gallery situation," she said over wine. "I should have been more understanding about your need to review the paperwork." "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. Good opportunities come along regularly for people who are patient. You're so wise. I'm lucky to have found a man who understands business." After dinner, we sat on the lanai watching the sunset over the Gulf. Sophia curled up next to me on the outdoor sofa, her head on my shoulder. "Harold, can I tell you something?" "Anything." "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words should have made my heart race. Instead, they made my blood run cold. According to Janet's timeline, this was right on schedule. Eleanor Vasquez was moving to phase 2 of her operation. "That's wonderful to hear," I said, stroking her hair. "I've been feeling the same way." "Have you really?" "Sophia, you've brought joy back into my life. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way about anyone after Eleanor." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes, real tears, which impressed me. Eleanor Vasquez was a consummate actress. "Harold, I know this might sound crazy, but have you ever thought about marriage? I mean, in general?" And there it was. The setup for the final phase. "Actually, I have," I said carefully. "Eleanor always said that when you find the right person, you shouldn't wait. Life is too short to spend it alone." Sophia sat up, her eyes bright with what looked like genuine emotion. Do you think we could be right for each other?" "I think we could be perfect for each other." She kissed me then, softly at first, then with increasing passion. When we broke apart, she was smiling through her tears. "Harold Mitchell, are you proposing to me?" "If you'll have an old banker who snores and tells terrible jokes?" "Yes." She laughed. Yes. As we celebrated our fake engagement with champagne, I was already planning her downfall. The next morning, I called David with an update. "Dad, please tell me you didn't actually propose to this woman." I gave her exactly what she wanted. "Now she'll start moving fast to lock down my assets before I have time to reconsider." "Dad, this is incredibly dangerous. What if she figures out that you know who she is?" "David, I've been investigating criminals longer than she's been alive. I know how to play a role. What's your endgame?" "I want her to attempt the actual theft. Wire transfers, forged documents, whatever her method is. When she makes her move, we'll have everything we need for federal prosecution." "Dad, you're playing with fire." "Son, I've been playing with fire my entire career. This time I'm the one holding the matches." That afternoon, Sophia called with news that confirmed Janet's predictions. "Harold, I've been thinking about our future together. I want to be completely honest with you about my financial situation." "Of course, sweetheart. My art business has been struggling lately. I have some debts that I need to resolve before we get married. I don't want to bring financial problems into our relationship. Classic setup. Create a crisis that requires the target's assistance. How much are we talking about? About $120,000. I know it's a lot, but once we're married, we'll be partners in everything. Your success will be my success. Sophia, let me ask you something. After we're married, how do you see us handling our finances? Well, I assume we'd combine everything. Joint accounts, shared assets. That's what married couples do, isn't it? Absolutely. In fact, I've been thinking we should start that process before the wedding. You know, to simplify things. I could practically hear her heart racing through the phone. What do you mean? I mean, I'd like to add you to my accounts, include you on my investment portfolios, maybe even add your name to the deed of the house. I want you to feel secure, sweetheart. Harold, that's incredibly generous. Are you sure? I'm sure. Why don't you come over tomorrow and we'll start the paperwork? After I hung up, I called Janet Martinez. She took the bait, I reported. She'll be here tomorrow to start accessing my accounts. Mr. Mitchell, are you absolutely certain about this plan? Once she has access to your financial information, she could do serious damage. Janet, none of the accounts she'll see are real. My actual assets are protected in trusts she knows nothing about. What she'll be stealing from are decoy accounts that I've set up specifically for this operation. Thosi means certi. How much money are we talking about? Enough to make grand theft charges stick. The accounts show balances totaling $800,000. But they're all monitored by the FBI. The moment she attempts to transfer anything, federal agents will have everything they need. Mr. Mitchell, you've thought of everything. Janet, I spent 30 years catching people like Eleanor Vasquez. I know how they think, how they operate, and how they make mistakes. The next evening, Sophia arrived at my house carrying a briefcase full of what she claimed were business documents for our financial merger. Harold, I brought everything we'll need to streamline our accounts, she said. Kissing me at the door, we spent 3 hours in my study, with Sophia carefully documenting my account numbers, investment portfolios, and asset holdings. She took photographs of documents, made copies of statements, and asked detailed questions about my financial habits. Harold, you're even more successful than I realized, she said, reviewing my fake portfolio statements. $800,000 in liquid assets plus the house plus your pension. We're going to have a wonderful life together. I want to give you everything, Sophia. You've made me happier than I've been since Eleanor died. And I want to make you happy for the rest of your life. As she left that night, Sophia kissed me goodbye with what seemed like genuine affection. Elena Vasquez was either a sociopath or the most talented actress I'd ever encountered. But it didn't matter. In 48 hours, she'd make her move, and Harold Mitchell would finally get his revenge on behalf of every elderly man who'd been victimized by marriage scammers. The trap was set. The prey was coming. And at 68 years old, I was about to remind the criminal world that experience beats beauty, preparation beats passion, and justice sometimes requires playing the long game. The hunter had become the hunted, but the hunted had been hunting a lot longer than the hunter had been alive. Game almost over. Friday morning at 9:47 a.m., Elena Vasquez made the mistake that would destroy her entire operation. She thought she was stealing $200,000 from a lonely old man. She was actually stealing fake money while FBI agents recorded every keystroke. I was in my study, pretending to read the Wall Street Journal, when my phone alert chimed. The security app I'd installed showed Elena's BMW pulling into my driveway. She was 30 minutes early, a sign that she was either nervous or eager to complete her theft. "Good morning, beautiful," I said as I opened the door. She looked radiant in a white sundress, carrying what appeared to be a small purse but was actually a bag full of fraudulent documents. "Harold, I couldn't sleep last night," she said, kissing my cheek. "I kept thinking about our future together. Our future is going to be wonderful, sweetheart. Come in. I've got everything set up in the study." What Elena didn't know was that Janet Martinez was monitoring from a van parked 3 blocks away. FBI agent Sarah Collins was stationed in my neighbor's house with telephoto surveillance equipment, and every electronic device in my home was recording audio and video. We'd turned my house into a federal sting operation. "Harold, I brought the documents we discussed," Elena said. settling into the leather chair across from my desk. The ones for consolidating our accounts. Perfect. I've already logged into my banking system. We can start the transfers immediately. I opened my laptop, which showed the fake Chase Manhattan account I'd created specifically for this operation. The balance displayed $847,000, enough money to make Elena's eyes light up with greed. My goodness, Harold. I knew you were successful, but this is incredible. 30 years of careful investing, I said modestly, and now it's going to be ours to share. Elena pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be official banking documents. Harold, I've prepared everything we need to set up our joint account. If you could just sign these authorization forms, I can handle all the technical details. I examined the documents carefully. They were sophisticated forgeries, routing numbers that looked official, bank letterheads that appeared authentic, legal language that sounded legitimate. Helena Vasquez was a professional. These look comprehensive, I said. What exactly am I authorizing? Just the standard spousal asset transfer protocols. Once we're married next week, these will allow me to help manage our finances while you focus on retirement. Next week. She was moving faster than Janet had predicted. Sophia, are you sure we shouldn't wait until after the ceremony to combine everything? Harold, I want to start our marriage with complete financial transparency. No secrets, no separate accounts, no his and hers money. Just us together, sharing everything. The sincerity in her voice was Oscar-worthy. If I hadn't known she was a professional criminal, I might have believed her myself. I signed the first document with a flourish, then the second, then the third. Each signature was another nail in Elena's coffin, because each document was evidence of attempted fraud that would hold up in federal court. Now for the fun part, Eleanor said, moving her chair closer to mine. Let's set up the transfers. This was the moment Janet and I had been waiting for. Elena guided me through what she claimed was a routine consolidation process. In reality, she was instructing me to transfer my entire life savings to accounts controlled by her criminal organization. First, we'll move $200,000 to this transitional account, she said, pointing to a routing number that belonged to a shell company in Miami. This is just temporary, while the bank processes the joint account paperwork. I typed in the transfer information exactly as Elena dictated. On my screen, it looked like $200,000 was being moved from my account to hers. In reality, the FBI's cyber crimes unit was tracking every detail of the attempted theft. Perfect, Elena said, watching the fake transaction complete. Now let's transfer another $150,000 to this secondary account, just to diversify our holdings. I was watching a master criminal at work. Elena's technique was flawless. She never asked me to send money directly to her personal accounts. Instead, she used a sophisticated network of shell companies, temporary accounts, and financial intermediaries that would make the money extremely difficult to trace. Over the next hour, Eleanor guided me through 6 separate transfers, totaling $650,000. To her, it looked like she'd successfully stolen the majority of my retirement savings. To the FBI, it looked like she'd just committed multiple federal felonies while being recorded from 8 different angles. Harold, you've made me the happiest woman in the world, Elena said, kissing me passionately after the final transfer. We're going to have such a beautiful life together. I can't wait to start our new life, I replied, meaning every word, because our new life would begin with her arrest. That afternoon, Elena left my house believing she'd successfully executed the largest theft of her criminal career. What she didn't know was that FBI agents were already moving into position around her apartment complex. The moment she tried to access the stolen funds, federal law enforcement would be waiting. At 6 p.m., my phone rang. Agent Sarah Collins. Mr. Mitchell, she took the bait. Helena Vasquez just attempted to withdraw $50,000 from the first account. She's been arrested and is currently being processed at the federal building in Fort Myers. What about her associates? We've identified 4 other individuals connected to her operation. Raids are happening simultaneously in Miami, Tampa, and Orlando. Justice moved fast when you had 30 years of evidence-gathering experience. But I wasn't finished yet. Helena Vasquez had victimized at least 7 other men that I knew of. It was time for those men to get their day in court. The next morning, I drove to Tampa to meet Charles Watson. The 72-year-old retired engineer who'd lost $180,000 to Elena's Sophia Morales identity. "Mr. Mitchell," Charles said, shaking my hand at his front door. "I can't believe someone finally caught her. Charles, I need to ask you something. Would you be willing to testify against her in federal court?" His face hardened. "Mr. Mitchell, that woman destroyed my retirement. She took money I'd saved for my grandchildren's college education. Of course I'll testify." Similar conversations with Robert Greene in Fort Lauderdale and William Foster in West Palm Beach yielded the same response. Elena Vasquez had made one critical error in her victim selection. She'd chosen men who'd been successful in business, men who understood justice, men who weren't too embarrassed to fight back once they realized they'd been victimized. 3 weeks later, I sat in federal court in Miami, watching Elena Vasquez face the consequences of her crimes. She looked different in her orange jumpsuit, smaller, younger, less sophisticated. The glamorous art dealer persona had been replaced by the reality of a career criminal facing decades in prison. Her defense attorney tried every strategy in the book. He claimed Elena was the victim of an abusive relationship that had forced her into crime. He argued that her targets were wealthy men who could afford the losses. He suggested that the relationships had been genuine and the money transfers consensual. None of it worked. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, surveillance footage, recorded conversations, forged documents, and testimony from multiple victims. Elena Vasquez had left a paper trail that led straight to a federal penitentiary. When the prosecutor asked me to describe Elena's attempt to defraud me, I looked directly at her as I spoke. "Your Honor, Elena Vasquez didn't just try to steal my money. She tried to steal my dignity, my trust, and my capacity for human connection. She exploited my grief over my late wife's death. She weaponized my loneliness. She turned my desire for companionship into a tool for theft." Elena wouldn't meet my eyes, but what she didn't understand is that experience has value. Wisdom has power, and sometimes the best way to stop a predator is to let them think they've caught easy prey. The judge sentenced Elena Vasquez to 12 years in federal prison. Her associates received sentences ranging from 5 to 8 years. Their marriage fraud operation was permanently dismantled, and over $800,000 was recovered for victims. But the most satisfying moment came after the trial, when Charles Watson approached me in the courthouse hallway. "Harold, I want to thank you for something that goes beyond catching that woman." "What's that, Charles?" "You proved that being 68 or 72 or 75 doesn't make us helpless. You proved that we can fight back." That evening I sat on my lanai in Naples, watching the Florida sunset paint the Gulf of Mexico gold. For the first time in months, I was alone by choice rather than circumstance. Elena Vasquez had taught me something valuable: the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness made you vulnerable to predators who promised companionship in exchange for your life savings. Solitude gave you the clarity to recognize predators and the strength to destroy them. My phone buzzed with a text from my son David. "Dad, I saw the news coverage of Elena's sentencing. I'm proud of you for fighting back, but I'm also worried. Are you okay being alone again?" I typed back, "Son, I'm not alone. I'm surrounded by friends who respect me, neighbors who care about me, and the knowledge that I spent my career protecting people from criminals like Elena. That's not loneliness, that's legacy." 6 months later, I received a letter that made everything worthwhile. "Mr. Mitchell, you don't know me, but my name is Patricia Williams. I'm 73 years old, and I was contacted by a woman calling herself Amanda Sterling, who claimed to be an art dealer from Sarasota. Something about her story reminded me of the Elena Vasquez case I'd read about in the newspaper. I hired a private investigator, and we discovered that Amanda Sterling was actually Maria Santos, another professional marriage scammer. Thanks to your example, I knew how to protect myself and gather evidence. Maria Santos was arrested last week, and she's facing federal charges for targeting seniors throughout Florida. I wanted to thank you for showing seniors like me that we don't have to be victims. We can be warriors." I framed that letter and hung it in my study, next to my retirement photo from Chase Manhattan Bank. At 69, I'd learned that retirement doesn't mean the end of purpose. It means choosing what's worth fighting for. Elena Vasquez thought she was targeting A lonely old man with deep pockets and shallow defenses. She was wrong on every count. I wasn't lonely, I was selective, I wasn't old. I was experienced. I didn't have shallow defenses. I had 30 years of fraud investigation expertise, and I wasn't a victim. I was a guardian. Elena learned the hard way that some targets fight back, that some seniors have resources she never imagined. That age doesn't equal helplessness, and loneliness doesn't equal desperation. The marriage scammer thought she was hunting vulnerable prey. Instead, she awakened a predator who'd spent his career destroying people exactly like her. The hunter became the hunted, and the hunted had been hunting a lot longer than the hunter had been, alive and justice served. 2 years after Elena Vasquez went to prison, I was standing in front of 150 seniors at the Naples Community Center when someone asked the question I'd been expecting. "Mr. Mitchell, how do we know when someone genuinely cares about us versus when they're trying to scam us?" I looked out at the audience of men and women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who'd come to my monthly Senior Shield presentation. These were people who'd lived full lives, raised families, built careers, and were now trying to navigate the treacherous waters of dating after loss. "Mrs. Rodriguez," I replied, "the difference is in the timeline. Genuine affection develops slowly. Scammer affection follows a script. Too intense, too fast, with financial requests that coincidentally match your emotional investment." The applause was immediate. Over the past 2 years, my Senior Shield presentations had become the most popular program at senior centers throughout Southwest Florida. We'd helped over 200 seniors avoid romance scams, marriage fraud, and various other schemes targeting vulnerable older adults. But the most important change in my life had happened 6 months ago, when I'd met someone who reminded me that not every attractive woman interested in an older man was a criminal. Her name was Dr. Margaret Thompson, and she was 64 years old, recently retired from a 30-year career as a pediatric surgeon at Naples Community Hospital. We'd met at a charity fundraiser for the hospital's children's wing, an event where Elena Vasquez never would have appeared, because it involved actual charitable work rather than opportunities for theft. Margaret was intelligent, accomplished, financially independent, and had her own reasons for being cautious about new relationships. Her husband had died 3 years earlier, and she'd already encountered 2 men who seemed more interested in her surgeon's pension than her personality. "Harold," she'd said during our first coffee date, "I need you to know that I've already done a background check on you." I'd nearly choked on my cappuccino. "You did what?" "I hired a private investigator. After reading about your Elena Vasquez case, I figured if you could investigate romance scammers, I could investigate potential dates. That was the moment I knew Margaret Thompson was someone special." "What did you find?" I'd asked. "I found a man who spent 30 years catching criminals, who used his expertise to protect other seniors from predators, and who has a reputation for absolute integrity in both his professional and personal life. And I found someone worth getting to know." 6 months later, our relationship had developed into something Elena Vasquez couldn't have faked if she'd tried. Genuine companionship based on mutual respect, shared interests, and compatible life experiences. Margaret accompanied me to Senior Shield presentations, sharing her perspective as someone who'd also been targeted by opportunistic suitors. Together, we'd developed a comprehensive program that addressed not just romance scams, but the broader issue of maintaining autonomy and dignity while seeking companionship in later life. After the Naples presentation, Margaret and I drove home to the house we now shared. We'd moved in together 3 months earlier, not because of financial necessity or romantic urgency, but because we enjoyed each other's company and wanted to build something together. "Harold, we received another letter today," Margaret said as we settled onto the lanai with our evening cocktails. She handed me an envelope postmarked from the Federal Correctional Institution in Tallahassee. Elena Vasquez had been writing to me every few months since her incarceration, and each letter followed the same pattern: remorse, explanation, and eventually a request for assistance. This letter was no different. "Dear Harold, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking a lot about our time together, and I want you to know that my feelings for you were genuine, even though my actions were wrong. I made terrible mistakes, but the connection we shared was real. I'm writing because my parole hearing is coming up next year, and I'm hoping you might consider writing a character reference letter. I know I hurt you, but I've spent these 2 years becoming a better person. I've completed addiction counseling, financial responsibility courses, and victim impact programs. I understand if you can't forgive me, but I hope you can see that people can change. I'm not the same woman who made those terrible decisions. I just need someone to believe in my rehabilitation. With sincere regret and hope for forgiveness, Eleanor. I handed the letter to Margaret, who read it with the clinical detachment of someone who'd spent decades making life and death decisions. What do you think? I asked. I think Elena Vasquez is still running a con game. She's just adapted her technique for a prison environment. How can you tell? Because genuine remorse focuses on the harm caused to victims, not on what the perpetrator needs from those victims. This letter is all about what Elena wants. Forgiveness, assistance, a character reference. There's no real acknowledgement of the damage she caused to you and her other victims. Margaret was right. Elena's letter mentioned her own rehabilitation and growth, but it never addressed the financial devastation she'd caused Charles Watson, Robert Greene, and William Foster. It never acknowledged the emotional trauma of realizing that someone you trusted had manipulated your grief and loneliness for profit. Are you going to respond? Margaret asked. I'm going to respond, but not the way she expects. That evening, I wrote Elena a letter that I hoped would end our correspondence permanently. Eleanor, I received your letter requesting assistance with your parole hearing. I want to be clear about something. My role in your life ended the day you were sentenced for defrauding me and multiple other victims. You mentioned that your feelings for me were genuine. But genuine feelings don't come with wire transfer instructions. You say you've become a better person, but your letter suggests you still view your victims as resources to be exploited for your benefit. Real rehabilitation would involve taking responsibility for the harm you caused without asking anything from the people you hurt. Real change would mean understanding that your victims owe you nothing. Not forgiveness, not assistance, and certainly not character references. I hope you do become a better person, Elena. But that transformation needs to happen without any involvement from the people whose lives you damaged. Do not contact me again, Harold Mitchell. After I mailed the letter, Margaret and I began planning our next Senior Shield presentation. The topic would be red flags in recovery, when criminals try to re-victimize their targets. We'd seen too many cases where incarcerated scammers attempted to manipulate their victims from prison, using letters, phone calls, and proxy contacts to continue their psychological manipulation. Harold, we need to address something that most senior safety programs ignore, Margaret said, as we reviewed our presentation materials. What's that? The stigma that prevents victims from reporting crimes or seeking help. Too many seniors stay silent because they're embarrassed about being fooled. She was absolutely right. In my work with victims of Elena's fraud ring, I'd discovered that shame was often more damaging than financial loss. Charles Watson had withdrawn from social activities because he felt stupid for trusting Sophia Morales. Robert Greene had stopped dating entirely because he couldn't trust his own judgment about women. Margaret, what if we created a support group? Seniors who've been targeted by scammers, sharing their experiences and helping each other rebuild trust? I love that idea. We could meet monthly, maybe here at the house. We could call it the Second Chance Circle, people who've been victimized once but refuse to let criminals control their future relationships. 3 weeks later, 8 seniors gathered in our living room for the first Second Chance Circle meeting. Charles Watson was there, along with Robert Greene and a woman named Dorothy Martinez who'd lost $45,000 to a fake investment scammer. Each person shared their story without judgment or shame, and each person left with practical strategies for protecting themselves while remaining open to genuine relationships. Harold, Charles said after our 3rd meeting, this group has given me something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope. Hope that I can trust my own judgment again. Hope that not everyone who shows interest in me is trying to steal from me. That was when I realized the most important victory in fighting. Elder fraud wasn't catching criminals. It was helping victims reclaim their confidence, their autonomy. and their belief that they deserved companionship and respect. 6 months later, Charles Watson began dating a widow he'd met at his church. Robert Greene joined a sailing club and found a community of people who shared his passion for the water. Dorothy Martinez started volunteering at a literacy program and discovered that helping others was the best antidote to feeling victimized herself. As I write this, Margaret and I are preparing for our wedding next month. It will be a small ceremony in our backyard, attended by family, friends, and members of our second chance circle. We're both in our 70s, both widowed, both protective of our independence, and both grateful to have found someone who enhances rather than threatens our autonomy. Elena Vasquez taught me to be suspicious of beautiful women who showed sudden interest in older men. Margaret Thompson taught me the difference between reasonable caution and paranoid isolation. The marriage scammer thought she was targeting a vulnerable widower. Instead, she created a man who understood the difference between loneliness and solitude, between companionship and exploitation, between love and manipulation. Elena Vasquez destroyed her own life trying to steal mine, Margaret. Thompson enhanced her life by sharing hers. That's the difference between a predator and a partner. And at 70 years old, I finally understand that the best revenge against people who try to steal your capacity for trust is to find someone worthy of that trust and build something beautiful together. The scammer tried to teach me that love was a transaction, but love, I've learned, is a transformation, and mine is just beginning. 3 years later, I was standing at the altar in my own backyard, watching Margaret walk toward me in a simple white dress, when I realized Elena Vasquez had given me the greatest gift of all, the wisdom to recognize genuine love when it finally arrived. The ceremony was everything Elena's fake romance hadn't been. Honest, transparent, and witnessed by people who genuinely cared about our happiness rather than our bank accounts. My son David served as best man, Margaret's daughter Sarah was matron of honor, and the second chance circle members filled the front row like a protective family. Dearly beloved, began Pastor Williams from Margaret's church, we gather today to celebrate the union of two people who understand that love isn't just about finding someone to grow old with. It's about finding someone who makes growing old an adventure. At 71 and 67, Margaret and I were proof that second chances could be better than first ones. During our vows, I looked into her eyes and said, Margaret, you taught me the difference between someone who wants to share your life and someone who wants to steal it. You showed me that real love enhances independence rather than threatening it. You proved that trust can be rebuilt even after it's been shattered. Margaret's vows brought tears to several guests. Harold, you showed me that experience isn't something to hide from potential partners. It's something to celebrate. You proved that a man who survived loss and betrayal isn't damaged goods. He's proven goods. You taught me that the best relationships are built on respect, not rescue. After the ceremony during the reception on our lanai overlooking the Gulf, Charles Watson approached me with news that felt like a wedding gift. Harold, I wanted you to be the first to know. Elena Vasquez was denied parole last month. I felt a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness. What was the reason? According to my contact at the parole board, she failed to demonstrate genuine rehabilitation. They said her letters to victims seeking assistance showed she still viewed her crimes as relationship problems rather than serious felonies. Margaret joined our conversation, having overheard Charles's update. How do you feel about that, Harold? She asked. I feel like justice was served. Eleanor had her chance to change, and she chose to continue manipulating people instead of taking responsibility for her crimes. But Elena Vasquez's fate was less important than what we'd built from the wreckage of her deceptions. The Senior Shield project had grown far beyond our monthly presentations. We now had programs in 12 senior communities throughout Florida, with trained volunteers helping other seniors recognize and avoid various scams targeting older adults. More importantly, our Second Chance Circle had spawned similar support groups in 6 other cities. Seniors who'd been victimized by romance scammers, investment fraudsters, and family manipulators were helping each other rebuild trust and confidence. Harold, said Dorothy Martinez during our first anniversary celebration, you saved my life in more ways than one. Dorothy had joined our original group after losing $45,000 to a fake investment scammer. 18 months later, she was leading her own support group in Fort Myers and had started dating a retired teacher she'd met at a literacy volunteer program. How so? I asked. You didn't just help me avoid future scams. You helped me remember who I was before I got victimized. You reminded me that being fooled once doesn't make you a fool permanently. That was the real victory, helping people reclaim their sense of self-worth. Robert Green had found love with a widow from his sailing club. Charles Watson had married his church friend in a ceremony where Margaret and I served as witnesses. Even Sophia Martinez was engaged to her retired teacher, planning a wedding for the following spring. You know what the best part is? Charles said during our group meeting. None of us are afraid anymore. We're cautious, but not paranoid. Careful, but not closed off. We learn to protect ourselves without isolating ourselves. 6 months after our wedding, Margaret and I received a request that would expand our mission nationally. The FBI's Elder Justice initiative wanted us to develop a comprehensive program for training seniors to identify and report financial crimes. They'd been impressed by our success rate, over 400 seniors trained, with 0 reported victimizations in our graduate community. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, said Agent Patricia Johnson during our meeting in Naples, what you've created is unique. Most elder protection programs focus on telling seniors what not to do. Your program teaches them how to fight back. Fighting back requires more than just knowledge, Margaret replied. It requires confidence. Too many seniors think being elderly means being vulnerable. We teach them that experience is a strength, not a weakness. The federal program launched 6 months later with a name that captured our philosophy. Silver Shield, Senior-Led Protection Training. The concept was simple. Train seniors who'd survived various scams to become educators and advocates for other seniors. Peer-to-peer education was more effective than top-down warnings from younger authorities who'd never faced the unique challenges of aging in a predatory world. Margaret developed the psychological recovery components, helping victims overcome shame and rebuild confidence. I handled the investigative training, teaching seniors how to research potential romantic partners, verify investment opportunities, and document suspicious activities. Our first national conference drew 300 seniors from 22 states. The keynote speaker was Sophia Martinez, a 75-year-old retired FBI agent who'd been victimized by a grandson scammer but had turned her experience into expertise, helping law enforcement across the Southwest identify family-based elder abuse. The criminals think we're easy targets because we're polite, trusting, and financially comfortable, Sarah told the audience. What they don't realize is that we're also experienced, resourceful, and absolutely furious about being underestimated. The applause lasted 3 minutes. During the conference, I had the honor of presenting the first Silver Shield Distinguished Service Award to someone who'd become an inspiration to every senior in our movement, Margaret Thompson Mitchell. This award goes to someone who proved that love after loss is possible, that trust after betrayal can be rebuilt, and that the best revenge against people who try to steal your faith in humanity is to find someone who restores it. Margaret's acceptance speech brought the entire audience to their feet. 3 years ago, I was a widow, afraid to trust anyone who showed interest in me. Harold and I met because we were both suspicious of potential partners who seemed too good to be true. We learned that healthy skepticism isn't the opposite of love. It's the foundation of love that lasts. As I finish writing this story, Margaret and I are preparing for the 3rd annual Silver Shield Conference. We now have active programs in 47 states, with over 2,000 trained senior advocates helping their communities identify and prevent elder-targeted crimes. The recidivism rate among seniors who've completed our training is effectively 0. But statistics don't capture the real success, the renewed confidence in people like Charles, Robert, and Dorothy, the second-chance marriages that have flourished in our community. The grandchildren who've learned from their grandparents that age brings wisdom, not weakness. Elena Vasquez taught me about predators. Margaret taught me about partners. Elena showed me how criminals exploit loneliness. Margaret showed me how companions celebrate solitude. Elena tried to steal my future. Margaret helped me build one. The difference between a scammer and a soulmate isn't about age, beauty, or financial status. It's about intention. Scammers want to take from your life. Partners want to add to it. Elena wanted access to my bank accounts. Margaret wanted access to my thoughts, my dreams, my daily experiences of watching sunsets over the Gulf of Mexico. Elena offered false intimacy in exchange for real money. Margaret offered real intimacy in exchange for mutual respect. At 74, I've learned that the best protection against romance scammers isn't avoiding romance entirely. It's learning to recognize the difference between someone who wants to share your life and someone who wants to steal it. The marriage scammer thought she was hunting vulnerable prey. Instead, she created a movement of silver-haired warriors who refused to let criminals define their capacity for love, trust, and companionship. Elena Vasquez is serving 12 years in federal prison. I'm serving a life sentence of happiness with someone who chose me for reasons that have nothing to do with money and everything to do with the man I became after surviving her deception. The scammer tried to teach me that love was a transaction, but love, I've learned, is a transformation. The hunter became the hunted. The bees hunted became the teacher. And doom. The teacher became the protector of everyone who refuses to let age be mistaken for weakness. If you're a senior who's been targeted by romance scammers, remember this: being fooled doesn't make you foolish. Being victimized doesn't make you weak. Being lonely doesn't make you desperate. It makes you human. And humans have something criminals never expect: the capacity to learn, adapt, and fight back. Welcome to the Silver Shield generation. We're not your typical seniors. We're the seniors who fight back, and we're the seniors your criminals should fear, because experience, wisdom, and righteous anger are the most powerful weapons of all.